Here I am late again. I forgot to start the video. Carburetor disassembly. All right, I'll give you the model number and everything else in a minute. Here's how it looks when it's all together. Float assembly sits on top. I think they call this a turtleback Rochester 2-barrel carburetor. So it's like this. There are 8 screws that hold this down on top of the carburetor assembly, on top of the manifold. You take those 8 screws, disconnect the fuel line, bring it over to the bench so it can drip gas. Do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more screws and pull straight off. Then you have the float assembly exposed. That's what this is, float adjustment. And inside the carburetor, you have your jets and needles and ports. And for me, I have lots of slime. Ew. All right, I'll give you a rundown on how to rebuild it. And we're gonna be going through the overhaul and rebuild mentioned here for the GM Rochester carburetor. This is pretty important. Taking a note at the following adjustments that need to be made before you can say that your carburetor is dead. First is float adjustment. Second is pump actuating lever adjustment. This one's a little confusing for me, I'll be honest. Reading it in the instructions, I think it's going to be some trial and error. We'll do it together. Choke adjustment, unloader adjustment, fast idle. Here's my carburetor all taken apart right now. Bits and pieces. Identify each one of these parts. The instructions that came with the Mike's carburetor kit. And the parts all laid out nice. Cool? All right, we'll go through this thing together. So before we can start reassembly, we need to make sure that every mating surface where there was a gasket is clean. I've just separated the throttle body from the bowl of the carburetor, or the base of the carburetor. I guess the bowl is in another section. Somebody at some point did some carb work to this, but they didn't tighten things up properly, and I don't think they did a very good job of sealing things. This gasket was underneath there, and that looks okay, but we've got to replace all of this with the new pieces that we got. And before we do that, we want to make sure that every surface is nice and clean. I just scraped off my multi-scraper here, make sure my edge is all clean on the bench grinder. That way I get a nice clean mating surface. And when I know this thing is good, doesn't have any more residue, I'll go ahead and reinstall. So replaced the gasket, made sure everything was clean, and now I'm just tightening it down. How tight do I tighten it down? Tight. Not too tight, tight. How's that sound? There's some split washers on the screws. I'm just making sure that those are tight, compressed. These gaskets make a seal, and then that's it. Obviously, the rest of the gaskets we're going to do as we reassemble it. So one of the first steps in reassembly is putting in the air idle screws. And those guys are going to go right in here, these orifices. What's interesting is the one that I replaced that was in my carburetor is definitely smaller in length than the ones that came from Mike's carburetor. I don't know if that means I had the wrong part or what, but we'll go ahead and follow the instructions that Mike has. They say to put these in until they lightly seat. Obviously you don't want to go too tight because you don't want to dimple that brass. And then back it out approximately 1 turn. Whenever they tell you to seat these things lightly, they're not kidding. You're not going to be able to see on the camera, but when I look down into the throttle body, after lightly seating, I can just barely make out the tip of that brass needle coming through there. If I were to continue to tighten up, I'd be just scoring the brass edge. So I'm just spinning these things until I feel resistance. And look at that, I can see it. Man, I wish I could show you, but I can see the head of it just popping through. When it was on the car, I couldn't do that. It was too low, but now I can. Now they say back these out approximately 1 turn. So that's what we'll do. Okay, so I'm using the screwdriver head to count out how many rotations I have. So this is gonna be 1/2, and this is gonna be 1. Same with this. 1/2, 1. Cool, that's done. From my parts tray over here, I'm taking out the pieces that I have used that were included in the kit, so I don't forget to install something. You are done, and you are done. I'll set these off to the side. Here's a good side. Oh, how about in the box? Okay. Instructions say, run the screws down until they seat tightly, back them out approximately 1 turn. Place the gasket in between the throttle body. I already did that one. Install the 3 screws, 26, did that one, that's how I hold it together. Tighten securely. Connect the choke rod between the fast idle cam and the choke counterweight. Connect the pump rod, 29, between the throttle lever and the pump actuating lever. Man, now we're getting confusing. This is interesting. Connect the choke rod, we did that, between the idle cam and the counterweight. That's this guy. Now here we go into the accelerator pump, and this is what I was having trouble with to begin with. It says connect the pump rod, 29, I'll show you the diagram on the other side, between the throttle lever and the actuating lever. 29, right here, okay, right here. This rod is this rod, and this rod was on my 1949 all the way up here on the top hole. What's interesting is these instructions say that 1949 is supposed to use the topmost hole, but 1950 is supposed to use the mid hole. I've just moved mine down a hole because this little tag was on my carburetor. See the serial number up at the top? That serial number corresponds with the 1950, not the 49. So the car's a 49, but my carb is a 1950. I wonder if all along it was a linkage issue and I was following instructions for 1949. Because this is the original accelerator pump that I'm replacing, and it doesn't have any holes. Yeah, it's a little crusty, but it's not horrible. And yeah, lessons learned. You want to adjust the accelerator pump on your Oldsmobile or your classic GM with a Rochester AA Carb. These are the 2 carbs, by the way, just so you can take a look. Here's how you do it. Since mine's a 1950 carburetor, my adjustment hole is going to be the one in the middle here. You put the link in here, you put the link down here. But there's a little more to it than that. First, you've got to back off your throttle screws, high and low. Make sure those are totally loose so the throttle body can fall and it doesn't have any resistance whatsoever, okay? Then what you're gonna do is you're gonna push down on the accelerator pump. It's actually housed inside the carburetor. At full travel, you wanna make sure that the hole, again, I'm in the middle. If I can get it in the middle, come on, is just below the hole. Just below. Manual actually says that it's got to be flush with the bottom of that hole. Looks like I need to bend mine just a little bit more. And that's exactly what you do. You just bend this rod, taking the curve out of it until the linkage is set. That way when you accelerate, it moves the throttle or the accelerator pump at full circle.